Hi everyone, my name is Felicia. Today I'll be presenting a paper on labor transparency in situated computational impact research. And this paper is coming out of IBM and is authored by myself, Felicia Jing, as well as Sara Berger and Juana's Catalina Becerra Sandoval. So our paper is written in the context of growing interest in participatory approaches as a means to directly include communities in technology research. And our work centers on the question of how to understand the value of community inclusion and the politics of that understanding. So to set us up with some more context, I think many researchers are optimistic, for example, about participatory research on emerging technologies. And we can understand the value of inclusion in efforts to examine and protect and prevent technology-mediated harms. And as a means to understand these harms in their historical and social context, and as a way to structure more direct engagements with community stakeholders. At the same time, however, much of this research happens in corporate contexts, or it is at least embedded in the technology industry, one that values inclusion in a different and sometimes competing way. We have seen, for example, a recent phenomenon where diversity and inclusion has suddenly become entangled with corporate strategies, where inclusion becomes a way to gain access to community expertise, or even to manufacture community approval of ethical tech. So in our research, we organize these risks under the name of corporate capture. This is a term that we believe describes a number of concerning trends within the tech industry, from the documented influence of industry funding on tech ethics discourses, to predatory inclusion schemes that operate on extractive terms, to the recent explosion of corporate investments into DEI. And here, diversity and inclusion provide clear value to corporate bodies, either as a mode of absolution, as a way of maintaining business reputation, and generally as a way to turn more radical commitments to social change into technical and governance solutions. And participatory approaches are poised to play into these politics in some way or another. The question now is how to develop a critical orientation that is sensitive to the threat of capture. And where others before us have investigated similar and sometimes overlapping issues like epistemic extraction and effective burden and the colonial dynamics in participatory practice, we extend this work to suggest that since corporate capture targets specifically the value of inclusion, we need to interrogate how that value is created, who works to produce it, and how ultimately it is appropriated. So in our work, we propose a strategic focus on the hidden labor at work in community collaboration, and we present a case study of participatory sessions that we recently conducted in a large corporate environment, here to illustrate how specific labor dynamics emerge through our research contexts and our conventions and our personal assumptions. To give some background on the case study, in June 2022, we began work on the Responsible and Inclusive Participatory Initiative, or RITP for short. RITP's pilot sessions were designed to investigate emerging technologies like voice tech and generative AI and neurotech, and we hope to provide a space for interested participants to explore and discuss the impact of these technologies on both themselves and their communities. So the initiative identified collaborators among leaders of company D&I initiatives, as well as from business resource groups organized around shared identity and background. Today, we focus on the following three elements of RITP. First, our participant recruitment practices and how we were challenged by conventions around informed consent and the labor relationships that they established. Second, our pilot participatory sessions and our struggles with specifically the expectations to produce participatory artifacts. And third, the norms around authorship and questions of how to share results in a way that was truly participatory. In each of these cases, our primary focus is on moments of tension themselves, and we do this as our approach draws on agonistic participatory design principles. Our narration of the case study also follows an autoethnographic structure that emphasizes the necessity of methodological reflexivity in research on labor and power dynamics. And at each stage, we situate our research practices from how research problems are constructed to how findings are reported, all in their socio-political and economic contexts. And we do this as they appear in field notes and debrief memos, all taken over the course of 6 months of the initiative. In planning the sessions, we initially organized a prototyping workshop, and we imagined that the process of co-creating artifacts would act as a way for participants to explore alternative technology futures. But after piloting our first session, we noticed an emerging tension between business interests and those of participants. And you can pause to read these excerpts from our field notes if you would like, but I'll end up summarizing them too. We realized that perceptions around what counted as a valuable artifact was circumscribed by business considerations over what had potential for adoption, what would demonstrate measurable impact. Take these conventional artifacts, for instance. And this bias towards tangible, deliverable, and solution-oriented design artifacts was reinforced by a business culture that defines research value by particular quality standards, corporate KPIs, and output-based reward structures. In this context, our workshop risked taking on the characteristics of a work site. Our methodological decisions and research training would demand a certain type of production from participants, one that interpolates them as laboring subjects. Even where in some cases these demands might be voluntary or mutually beneficial, the operative assumptions about what is valuable closes off possible modes of collaboration. And as we see in our case here, this closing usually occurs across existing structures of power. Turning to recruitment, we noted another tension in our process of securing informed consent. In our prior experiences with UX and clinical research, participants are typically provided an ICF at the start of the study, like this one, and are asked to read and sign it in order to indicate a willingness to be exposed to various research procedures. Now, we immediately felt a conflict in the way that the consent form contractually defined the boundaries of our collaboration, where participation is legible only within the workshop, but not, for instance, in analysis. And if we reframe participation as a form of labor, we might understand the ICF as a means to define the terms of work for participants, much like a wage contract. So, for instance, where ICFs typically include a list of potential benefits of participation, we'll see that these are only the disclosed gains of the research overall. The ICF leaves undisclosed other forms of value that are assumed to belong to researchers and their affiliated institutions, such as publications and funding opportunities. And by dictating a timeline and distribution of benefits in this way, ICFs carve out a strategic beginning and end of research, while leaving participants estranged for any value produced outside those terms. Lacking in transparency and bidirectionality, this is especially problematic because these moments in our taken-for-granted research infrastructures contributes to the potential of alienating collaborators from the value of their work with us. By August, the RITP project finished its final pilot of the sessions, and we began a more long-term collaboration with 11 of our participants to interpret and present results together. And as others heard about our work, we noticed that their invitations to come share these results were almost always directed at us, rather than this collective as a whole. And herein lies a major tension within conventional norms about authorship. These invitations assume a particular distribution of credit, what we call economies of credit. We were identified to speak on behalf of the project, while participants would only be encountered in the distilled products of their labor, such as within quotes or generic descriptions of demographic data. And it is of note that these status quo approaches to authorship tends to pave the conditions towards corporate capture. As long as results are attributed to researchers and their institutions rather than large-scale communities or extra-institutional collaborators, this criticality is vulnerable to neutralization by logics of technological solutionism and expert lenses. Preserving the possibility of radical projects requires that we reframe our approach to authorship. So, the RITP case study illustrates how certain ways of directing and obscuring participant labor can make community collaboration vulnerable to corporate capture, in part by creating its very conditions, through a specific organization of value production. Navigating these dynamics in a way that's fair and responsible is central to equity and justice-oriented participatory projects, yet they remain largely under-theorized by researchers and opaque to participants. To conclude, we learned from the RITP project to reflexively document these dynamics in order to promote labor transparency and potentially to even open the door to negotiating the terms of work with participants themselves. In our full paper, you can read about how we chose to address each of these obstacles discussed in the case study and view a few tools we developed to support future researchers. These include a series of provocations and a documentation schema. Thank you so much for your interest in our work. Here you can find a snapshot of our research as well as contact information if you would like to get in touch. Thank you. Thank you.